Hi, my name is Gaither, and I'm currently a graduate student in the PhD Social Psychology program at Tufts University, which is in the Boston area of Massachusetts. I'm actually biracial, which made me very interested in wanting to study how biracial populations actually compare to their monoracial counterparts. The biracial population actually represents the second fastest growing population in our country, yet researchers are just now beginning to explore how these populations may differ or may be the same as their monoracial counterparts. For this study, I was interested in examining the other race effect with biracial populations. For those of you who don't know, the other race effect is a well-studied phenomenon which basically states that people are usually better at distinguishing faces from their own racial background in comparison to faces from another racial background. Now, for the biracial population, I have the question of, well, for these infants or kids who constantly have two different racial exposures in their home environments, how does this other race effect apply to them? Are they better or worse face processors because of this? And this question really hasn't been studied to date yet. So for this study, I recruited 3-month-old monoracial white infants, monoracial Asian infants, and half white, half Asian infants. All of these infants were from the Los Angeles area, so in addition to being able to examine a biracial population for the first time, we also were able to examine how infants who are readily exposed to other racial backgrounds also fare within the standard other race effect paradigm. To date, people have really only used infants who are never exposed to any people from any other racial backgrounds. So these were my two main questions of interest in this study. For this study, we recruited infants to come into the lab, and they actually went through a standard habituation other race effect paradigm, where they're shown one face over and over and over again until the infants become habituated to that face, and then at test trial, we'll show two faces side by side. One is the face that they were habituated to, and the other face being a new face. And during these test trials, we record which faces they look at longer for novelty preferences and things of that sort. All of our infants who came into the lab either were first habituated to Asian faces or white faces, and then they went through this test trial at the end. In addition to collecting this other race effect standard looking time differences, we also ran this entire study on a Tobii eye tracker. So we were able to record how long infants look specifically at different areas of the faces, as well as the transitions they made during these learning and distinguishing processes. What we ended up finding was the other race effect, which is very well established to be emerging in the infant population somewhere between 3, 6, and 9 months of age, actually didn't exist for these infants at all. So our white infants, for example, were not any better at distinguishing white faces. The Asian infants were also not better at distinguishing Asian faces, which we should have found based on the literature. But we think that due to this extra racial exposure that these infants are getting in their daily lives, based on self-report measures from parents who filled out demographic forms, really is contributing to causing this other race effect to actually emerge later in life because of this extra added racial exposure. Secondly, and more interestingly as it relates to the biracial population, we actually found that biracial infants seem to use a completely different scanning or processing pattern in comparison to their monoracial counterparts. So for the monoracial infants, whether you are white or Asian, when scanning your own race faces, they actually tended to make more transitions on faces that they were better at distinguishing at. So the more transitions these infants were using, the better they were at distinguishing own race faces. We actually found the complete opposite pattern for our biracial population. The more transitions they were making on faces from their own racial background, which in this case for this study, since all of our biracial infants ended up having Asian mothers and we were showing Asian female faces, we treated that as the in-group for analysis purposes, actually led to worse distinguishing. We think that this actually matches up a little more nicely with how adults actually scan faces, since adults tend to need way less time to scan and process faces, since by the time you're in adulthood, you clearly have had so much more life exposure and life experience to scanning faces, that we think that this is the first evidence that may suggest that biracial infants, due to this added racial exposure on a daily basis in their home environments, actually are more advanced or more expert face processors in comparison to their monoracial counterparts. So I really hope you enjoy reading this paper. Please feel free to contact me with any questions or comments you may have, and I hope that this at least will motivate some of you out there to start to compare biracial and monoracial populations, since it really is a needed study focus in our future. Thank you.